Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Community for Exceptional Minds. We're going to continue on with our virtual book club to promote and celebrate Autism Awareness Month. So we're in Chapter 2 of Uniquely Human, and I just want to thank again Angela for reading to us last night. It's one thing to do something to try to connect with our students and just to try to build this community, but to do it with someone who's just like-minded. My dog is really unhappy that that I'm reading to everyone, so that's Porter. So before we start in our book Uniquely Human, we're just going to read one excerpt from The World According to Mr. Rogers. If anyone is following along with this book, we're on page 137. As human beings, our job in life is to help people realize how rare and valuable each one of us really is. That each of us has something that no one else has or ever will have, something inside that is unique to all time. It's our job to encourage each other to discover that uniqueness and to provide ways of developing its expression. Porter, come here, baby. Come here, Porter. We had an episode earlier today with my dear friend Janet, and she shared an incredible message on being bold and unique and being authentic, and she shared a really, really amazing art project. So I encourage you to watch that episode with Janet. Okay, so we are in chapter 2 called Listen. We're on the bottom of page 45. Every family has a language. As stories like these illustrate, echolalia offers lessons not just about language and communication development, but about raising children. Many parents look to doctors or therapists to be the experts, appealing to them to explain their children. Over time, I have come to realize that the best approaches to autism are those centered on the family. Parents almost always know their children better than anyone else does. And based on innumerable shared experiences over many years, every family develops its own language, its own familiar phrases, its own terms, its own shorthand. In other words, every family develops its own culture that allows for mutual communication, understanding, and support. Each family has its own native culture, and outsiders are most often alien to that culture. So rather than parents relying on outsiders, such as professionals, to make sense of things, the professionals need to rely more on the insiders, the parents, their children, and other family members. When parents ask me to explain their child's habit of repeating phrases and words or any perplexing pattern of behavior, my first response is always to turn the question around. Well, what do you think? Usually they can tell me, or at least make an educated guess. In either case, they often provide important information about their child that I was not aware of. And in the process, their expertise about their child is validated. For one study, I sent parent questionnaires asking about their experience of echolalia. Nearly all of their children with autism had experienced echolalia, for which the parents had their own explanations. Sometimes he does it to keep something in mind to help him understand it better. Sometimes she uses it to request something. That's how he takes his turn when he doesn't understand. When he echoes, he's saying yes. Nearly all of them found meaning in their child's unusual speech. Echolalia is a learning strategy. In fact, echolalia serves an even more vital purpose for many children with autism. It's a path to acquiring language. In the simplest terms, it works like this. Children with autism struggle with communication, but they tend to have a very strong memory. So they learn language by hearing it and repeating it back, either immediately or with some delay. As the child continues to grow socially, cognitively, and linguistically, she begins to discern the rules of language. But she does so in part through the use of echolalia, breaking down the memorized chunks of speech. Of course, that doesn't mean it's easy to live with. I always tell parents that just because it's functional language and vital to their child's developing communication doesn't mean it wouldn't drive them crazy at times. The 15th time your daughter repeats the same line from Toy Story 2, your head might be ready to burst. The 100th time your son says, we don't slam doors, we don't pee on the wall, you might feel like slamming the door on yourself. But it's important to take heart in two things. First, the knowledge that this kind of communication serves a purpose for the child, and second, that it represents an ever-evolving developmental process. Over time, the echoing will most likely lessen as a child's creative language system develops. Though, of course, progress comes at different rates and at different times in every child. Parents and others can help a child learn to use more creative language instead of echoing through various strategies, including simplifying the language they use with the child, breaking down echolaic chunks into smaller phrases, adding gestures, and introducing vital supports and written language. For example, a father might say to his daughter, "Please go over to the refrigerator and get some milk and cookies." The child might fill her turn in the conversation by merely echoing the sentence or part of it, but not really respond. Then the father might simplify the context sentence by dividing it into segments. Go to the refrigerator while pointing, get milk, open the cabinet, get cookies. Another strategy is to introduce photographs, pictures, or written words instead of exclusively using spoken language. This can help a child understand more readily and rapidly, making it less necessary to use echolalia as a strategy to understand. For some children, it's helpful for the child to write or type what he wants to say. This can improve his ability to formulate language rather than relying on retrieving memorized chunks. Most people with autism are stronger using visual ways to express and understand language than communicating purely by hearing and speaking. In my classroom, we do a lot of sign language. While it's crucial to acknowledge and understand the intentions and functions of echolalia, it's equally important to help the child move to more creative language and more conventional ways of communicating. Many children who use echolalia persistently when they are young use it less and less as they mature. But when faced with challenging circumstances or difficult moments of dysregulation, these children revert to echoing. Elijah, a middle school student was a passionate fan of Broadway musicals, in particular, The Lion King. Though Elijah had significant academic challenges, particularly in subjects requiring high-level comprehension of abstract language, he attended mainstream classes in his public middle school so he could benefit from the typical social environment. For the most part, He thrived there, except when he felt overwhelmed and anxious about the more challenging academic work. As his anxiety increased, Elijah would stand. Porter, it's okay, baby. Porter, honey. Elijah would stand up in the middle of history class and start singing, "Circle of Life," at the top of his lungs, first in English, then in German, which he'd learned from videos he'd found on the internet. The teachers at his school, for which I consulted, wanted to honor Elijah's creative spirit, but it's disruptive to have a student break out in show tunes in history class. So I asked Elijah why he sang during his class. His explanation: the teacher was talking too quickly, and Elijah couldn't keep up. He had a difficult time paying attention, and this was Elijah's way of regulating himself emotionally. The song was just another form of echoing, what some professionals have referred to as scripting. He wasn't being bizarre or displaying random behavior, he was coping. The same way another person might play a favorite tune in his head when feeling bored or stressed, but without projecting it publicly. Working with his teacher, parents, and others in the school, I sought a less disruptive way for him to calm himself. In addition to the songs, Elijah also liked drawing the Lion King characters. So we suggested that he bring a sketch pad to class and later a small whiteboard and markers, so that when he felt anxious, he could quietly draw instead of interrupting the class. Another teen who benefited from that kind of alternative outlet was Justin, a talented artist. When he was 11, a small local cafe agreed to host a show of his artwork. His parents welcomed the opportunity to work on his social skills, so he spent time rehearsing how he would greet his friends and strangers who might come to the show. The night of the opening, he shook hands and welcomed the first few guests appropriately. But as more and more people arrived, Justin became increasingly anxious and overwhelmed. So in place of a standard greeting, he asked, "Who's your favorite cartoon character?" Justin loved animation, and many of his pictures were cartoons. Even when he knew the individuals well, he forgot the greetings he had prepared and instead blurted out his question, showing little interest in the answer. The anxiety in his voice seemed to increase with each repetition. Justin's repeating his familiar question was like Elijah singing Lion King songs. In each case, the echo softened the anxiety. To replace this unusual greeting with a more conventional one, his parents prepared an index card with reminders of what to say in social situations. It wasn't a script, but it had some key words to remind him to stay engaged in a conversation rather than reverting to his familiar question. Knowing he had that visual and written reminder was enough to help Justin through social situations in which he felt overwhelmed and anxious. Echolalia also serves a developmental purpose. A child cannot become a creative and fully functional user of language merely by repeating memorized words or phrases, but echolalia is a start. For many of these children, it's the first step in understanding the basic concept that they can use their body as an instrument to produce speech that expresses wants, needs, observations, and feelings. And in that way, they can connect with other human beings. And we stopped at the bottom of page 49 and we are still in chapter 2 entitled Listen. Have a good evening.